The field of textual criticism, often misunderstood and sometimes misinterpreted, is the science of discovering errors in texts and the art of correcting them. Though it is a blend of science and art, it is neither an exact science like mathematics nor an arcane mystery. At its core, textual criticism is guided by reason and common sense. Every time we notice and correct a misprint, we engage in textual criticism. Despite its logical foundation, the process demands more than rote knowledge. It requires a discerning mind capable of applying thought and judgment. Textual criticism deals with the fluidity of human error, both mental and manual, making it unpredictable and unique in each case. It cannot be constrained by rigid rules because the mistakes it seeks to correct stem from human fallibility. Therefore, every textual issue must be approached on its own terms, with the critic acting more like a detective than a mathematician. This practice is not easily taught. Natural aptitude plays a significant role, and while habits of thought can be cultivated, the innate talent for textual criticism remains rare. A good textual critic is far less common than a competent grammarian. The difference lies in the application of critical thinking. While grammar relies on rules and structure, textual criticism requires sensitivity to nuance, context, and intention. The critic must not only recognize errors but also understand the underlying thought of the original author. The challenges in textual criticism are compounded by the fact that many engage in it without genuine interest or understanding. Some approach it mechanically, relying on established rules without questioning their applicability. This leads to superficial analysis that miss the deeper intricacies of the text. Others are driven by vanity or the desire for novelty, leading them to favor unconventional interpretations that lack solid grounding. Textual criticism often suffers from a lack of external checks. The average reader is usually ill equipped to evaluate the arguments of a textual critic, leaving room for inaccuracies and biases to go unchallenged. This isolation can foster an environment where intellectual dishonesty or laziness goes unnoticed and where flawed reasoning is accepted without scrutiny. The work of a textual critic is complicated by the abstract nature of text. Unlike physical sciences where hypotheses can be tested through experiments, textual criticism deals with intangible ideas. The closest it can get to an empirical test is the discovery of an older or more reliable manuscript, even though absolute certainty remains elusive, as the ultimate authority, the original autograph, is rarely, if ever, available. Examples of flawed reasoning in textual criticism are plentiful. A notable case involves the misidentification of Plautus's work, where scholars clung to traditions but incorrect readings despite clear evidence to the contrary. Such errors often arise from superficial analysis that ignore the complexities of manuscript submission. Critics may dismiss older, more reliable sources in favor of later, more complete ones without considering the weight of historical authenticity. Another recurring issue is the misuse of generalizations. Some critics make sweeping statements such as claiming that the more sincere manuscript is always superior. This ignores the nuanced reality that each manuscript may be evaluated on its individual merits. A text's value depends not only on its faithfulness to the original, but also on the nature and extent of its errors. The tendency to rely on simplistic heuristics extends to the emendation process. Some critics employ the so-called paleographical method, making minimal changes to a corrupt text in hopes of stumbling upon a sensible reading. While paleography is a useful tool, it should serve the critic's reasoning, not replace it. Effective emendation begins with understanding the author's intent and only then considers how scribal errors might have altered the text. Even when critics acknowledge the importance of context and authorial intention, they often fall into the trap of over relying on statistical norms. For instance, some argue against assuming interpolation in a text simply because it is statistically less common. Yet each case must be considered individually, and the specific circumstances surrounding a potential interpolation must be analyzed. Statistical likelihood should inform, not dictate, the critic's judgment. Grammar and meter present unique challenges in textual criticism. Critics must often navigate the paradox of using manuscript evidence to establish grammatical rules and then applying those rules to identify manuscript errors. This circular process requires careful judgment. While it is valid to correct a manuscript based on established rules, critics must remain open to the possibility that the manuscript preserves an authentic but unconventional usage. A common pitfall in this area is the uncritical accumulation of exceptions. Simply listing numerous examples where a manuscript deviates from a grammatical rule does not necessarily invalidate the rule. Each exception must be scrutinized to determine whether it reflects the author's intent or a scribal error. Without this level of analysis, critics risk drawing inaccurate conclusions based on superficial data. The role of thought in textual criticism cannot be overstated. It demands more than mechanical application of rules or blind adherence to tradition. Critics must engage deeply with the text, considering not only its linguistic and historical context, but also the psychological factors that may have influenced its transmission. Scribal errors often result from symbol mistakes, such as misreading similar letters, but they can also stem from more complex cognitive processes, such as the tendency to regularize unfamiliar forms. The critic's task is further complicated by the inherent limitations of the evidence. Manuscripts are often fragmentary, corrupt, or inconsistent, requiring the critic to make educated guesses based on incomplete information. In such cases, the ability to think critically and creatively becomes essential. Textual criticism is an exercise in intellectual humility. It requires the critic to acknowledge the limitations of their knowledge and to approach each text with a balance of skepticism and respect. The goal is not to impose modern interpretations on ancient works, but to reconstruct as faithfully as possible the original intent of the author. Despite its challenges, textual criticism remains an indispensable discipline. It is a foundation upon which reliable editions of texts are built, enabling scholars to study literature, history, and philosophy with greater accuracy. But to fulfill this role effectively, it must be practiced with rigor, thoughtfulness, and integrity. Progress in textual criticism, as in all scholarly pursuits, depends on the quality of the minds engaged in it. While tools and methodologies have evolved over time, the core requirements, intellectual curiosity, critical thinking, and a commitment to truth, remain unchanged. It is these qualities that distinguish the true critic from the mere compiler of data. Textual criticism is more than a technical exercise, it is a profound engagement with the human record. It bridges the past and present, connecting us with the thoughts and intentions of authors across time. To practice it well is to honor that connection, striving always to approach the text not as a static artifact but as a living dialogue between minds.